right, well, as promised, it is exactly noon, and I am really excited to kick off our webinar today. So I'm going to ask our other panelists to go ahead and turn their cameras on so you can see them all. We'll be doing a round of introductions here in a moment. My name is Jill Melton, and I'm Director of Admissions over all of our working professional programs here at SMU Cox. And so I know we have a lot of different individuals with us today joining us. So some of you are going to be joining our programs in the fall. Some of you are thinking about joining programs either this fall or maybe even into 2021. And today we really want to share with you some of the tools that we're teaching in our MBA classrooms as a way to really help you prepare for your MBA journey and also to give you a little bit of insight into what you can expect in the MBA classroom. But before I begin, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are going to be recording this session, so just be aware of that. And we will be sending out the recording to everyone afterwards. And if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, please click on the Q&A button and post your questions there. And you can do that throughout the presentation. We'll be saving most of the Q&A really towards the end of the presentation, but feel free to pop those in as your questions come up and we'll get to them as we can. Don't put them in the chat, just go ahead and put them right in the Q&A so we have one place where we're collecting all of them. So with that, what I want to do to start off today is really introduce our panelists. So again, my name is Jillian Melton. It's wonderful to welcome you all, and I see a lot of familiar names already joining in the group today. So thank you so much for joining us. I am the Director of Admissions for all of our working professional programs. So that includes our Executive MBA, our Professional MBA, our Online MBA, as well as our MBA Direct program. And I'll be telling you all a little bit more about those, or I'll kind of be weaving that in throughout our discussion today. But Karen, would you like to go and introduce yourself next?
Sure. So I've been teaching at SMU for over 12 years, and I have taught in person and online. My doctorate is from Rice University in Houston, and I've also worked in technology, and I've often found myself at the intersection of technology and human behavior. And most people realize that learning software or coding is a skill that you can acquire, but what I find so fascinating and what I love is when people realize that leadership skills and those behaviors can be learned as well. You can get better and become a more effective leader. So I teach organizational behavior, managing and leading people, and executive leadership, focusing on organizational change and managing effective teams.
Thank you, Karen. All right, Mary Beth.
Hi, or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Mary Beth Kinsey, and I'm also in the same department that Karen is, and I've been here since 2008. And I teach, I probably have a lot of you. I teach in the OMBA program, the PEMBA program. I've done a work in the EMBA program, and teach classes related to organizational behavior, ethics, leadership, those types of things. I have 15 years of real world experience before I came back to get my PhD. And so like a lot of the people in the panel here, we try and bring a lot of that experience into the classroom as we teach.
Thank you. All right, Arjun, you're next.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Arjun Singh. I've been involved with the SMU Cox School of Business since last year and really focusing on the global leadership programs. So my background is I'm a full-time consultant. I run a consultancy and we've consulted with a large part of the Fortune 500 companies. And so the leadership programs all around practical toolkits and helping companies solve problems while teaching students practical toolkits that are applicable in their working life. And I've been involved across the range of the MBA programs, the executive MBAs, the onlines, the PEMBAs as well.
Thank you. Last but not least, David Jacobson.
Great to meet you all here. I am David Jacobson. I'm the Executive Director of Online MBA and also the Executive Director of the MBA Direct program. I teach across all of the portfolio of MBA programs here. And I'm not an academic in the sense of having a PhD from somewhere, but I am an entrepreneur and am what's called a professor of practice here. And so I teach global business strategy. I'm a lawyer and I teach law and strategy. And I also lead the consulting project or GLP kinds of programs across the variety of portfolio that we have.
All right, thank you. I'm going to jump right in and share with you the agenda just so you can kind of orient yourself as to what we're going to be covering today. So the first topic that we're going to be covering is the leadership mindset. And especially during periods of great change, we want to make sure that we're embracing a growth mindset. So Karen and Mary Beth are going to be talking about different leadership skills and leadership lessons. And then Arjun is going to share with you some very specific MBA tools. So these are different frameworks and different tools that you can put into practice at work, this afternoon or tomorrow or over the coming weeks as you're tackling some really challenging projects at work. And I think that'll also help get everybody a little bit primed for what you'll be learning in the MBA. And then Arjun and David will also be talking about what we're doing with our current students across all of our different MBA program formats to teach through experiential learning. So that's going to be a large theme today. And then at the end, I'll come back and we'll do some Q&A and some wrap up. But before we begin and really dig into some of the leadership lessons that we can learn, what I always want to do is orient the conversation around what SMU Cox is all about and the framework or the lens with which we see everything in terms of how we're working with students and engaging with students. So these are the three pillars: leadership, analytics, and experiential learning that really carry everything that we do as a business school through. So we, of course, are really dedicated to teaching our students leadership skills, not only learning from empowering leaders, but also really examining our own leadership skills in order to grow and become stronger. So you'll see a lot of that today. We also want to make sure that everything we're doing is firmly rooted in an analytical mindset. And as you're going through the webinar today, what I want you to think about is not necessarily the data crunching or how to use data, but the analytical mindset in terms of how you're understanding problems. Because that's what a lot of the toolkit is all about, is how you frame up a problem, how you're uncovering the problem, how you're learning to solve that, and then how you're using data to communicate what the solution can be. So really building that analytical mindset, that muscle that we all have. And then, as I mentioned, everything that we do at the business school, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a very experiential way. So we want to have really lively classroom discussions, really impactful and engaging experiences where students are taking everything that they're learning and really putting it together. So we'll get into that a little bit. And this quote is something that our group, that as we've been working on this, have really centered around in terms of what future leaders are going to be like. And so I'll read it. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so our mission across all of our MBA programs is to equip our students with those skills so that you're continuing to learn, that it's this evergreen process where you're continually confronted with changing circumstances and growing stronger through that. And so as we lead into the components that Karen will be leading around leadership, I want you to think about this, is that change really does equal opportunity. And right now, of course, with coronavirus, with the protests that are going on, there's just so much change that we are all going through. And so it's really important for all of us to be examining in that, really thinking about what we can do to drive forward with that change and seeing what the opportunities are for ourselves, as well as our companies, our businesses, and our customers. So Karen, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a little bit more about the mindset.
Great. I love that Ben Franklin quote. And I think if we can all remember that change can be a good thing and that failure can be a good thing as well, that will help us get in the right mindset to learn. And so this idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset comes from the work of Carol Dweck. And it's kind of, how do we view setbacks and failure? Do they define us as who we are, or do we learn to grow from them? If 6 months ago I had asked many of you, are you good at video conferencing? Are you good at Zoom? Many of us might have said no, but we didn't mean no, I'm just bad with technology. We just meant not yet. My 80-year-old in-laws are using Zoom now, so we can learn it. It's just, we need to learn from failures and grow. So the power of the word yet. And the same thing is true with leadership. It doesn't mean that you're just not a good leader. You're just not good at it yet. Can you learn behaviors and skills, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, how to effectively motivate others to lead organizational change effectively? Yes. And so when we send people to training, we want to give them challenging opportunities to learn and grow. You don't want to just make it easy for people. You want to have enough of a challenge that you can learn from those mistakes. And so I love the famous FDR quote about a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor, because you do have to have little bumps in the road to learn from, but it's the mindset of trying to learn from those. And so that's in the very first course, we talk about what are your skills? We do a lot of assessments to figure out what you're good at and what you're struggling with. And then combine that with important content and research that's based in science, not just somebody who wrote a one-time book, but really looking at the overall research, what it says about what really works in the long term. And then we make plans to work on the weaker areas and capitalize on your strengths. And you're going to be able to do this for yourself, but also then for those that you lead, to be able to develop top talent, to create top teams. It's that power of that growth mindset, the power of yet. And to me, that's the power of an MBA. And you've heard the quote that, change is the only constant. And a lot of us are experiencing quite a bit of change in the last few months. Companies are having to adjust their strategies, their technologies, even just contactless payment or curbside pickup or the social distancing requirements, behavioral adjustments, cutting costs, changing our mission completely perhaps. All of these are changes, and how to effectively manage change is a really key skill that you'll learn as part of your MBA. So if I can have the next slide. There we go. So this is Kotter's 8 steps, and it is a robust framework and understanding of what's really required to enact sustainable change. And each step is really important, and you'd be given practical tips, and you would actually get to practice applying these change concepts to your work immediately. Begin applying these concepts to your life, work or personal, depending on your situation at the time. And the first step is to create that sense of urgency. And some of us are very data-driven. We love facts, but you really have to be able to connect to people's heart as well, to their emotions, and help people to see the why to create that sense of urgency. Smokers have the facts on the harm from smoking, but there's been a set of commercials recently that I've seen that aiming to change behavior by showing the impact of smoking on the family members who have to take care of the smoker, spend their time in the hospital, maybe losing a loved one. And so they're trying to connect emotionally. And that's part of, with organizational change, you have to start with the facts and the emotions. And then we get into getting a guiding coalition, making sure you have people from different functions within the organization, different levels of hierarchy, not just titles, but really think about who is influential. So within your organization, starting to think about who would that be? And it should include some of the skeptics that you have in your organization. Change is something that I see every day in the paper. So just as an example of something from this Sunday's paper, this applies to nonprofits too. There was an article about a school district, the Socorro School District, who switched to year-round schooling. And he talked about making sure he had a guiding coalition of stakeholders. And I was thinking, boy, who would that be? It would have to be not just parents and teachers, but childcare providers, summer camps, food service providers, the PTA, the athletic conferences. So if you can get those people on early and convert some of those skeptics, your change will be more effective. And so then creating that vision for what your change should look like. You can practice creating good vision statements and making sure that they're going to connect with people. It's not enough to just write that vision statement and keep it on your desk. You have to be able to communicate that. So you'll have a lot of practice in how to do that in school. And our job as a leader is to help get rid of the barriers. So to make sure that people have the needed resources. And in class, we would examine what some of the barriers are in your organization or in your situation. Right now, going back to the office, opening stores with new rules, new behavior patterns, there's a lot of changes that we're all probably experiencing right now. And how do you make those changes more effective? So being like, for example, if you want to be creative and innovative, but every decision requires 6 signatures, or people get punished for having ideas that don't work out, you're probably not going to get people to be more creative and innovative. So just thinking through what are the processes, the technologies, the skills of your people, the leadership styles, the systems that need to change. And then of course we could talk about this for hours, but I'll go quickly. But we want to see progress on some of the short-term wins. People love to see progress. We actually find that this is really a powerful motivator. It's kind of the power of small wins, that when we make progress, we're more likely to make more progress. So rewarding that as a leader, and then anchoring in those changes and to help avoid reverting back to previous behavior. So the same, the newspaper had an article about these makeup companies that have reopened, but people used to go into the stores to try on makeup and to see how it looked on their skin. And now the you know, they're not allowed to do that, but there's still employees doing that and still customers doing that. And so how do you change that behavior? Because you have to anchor in these changes and make them stick. So there's a lot of techniques and tools on how to really make a change in behavior stick. And that can be very challenging. I know I worked with a company that kept the old, it was a new technology system, and they kept the old technology system running in the background. And the people, there was actually a financial incentive to be able to do something from the old system in the background. And so they were actually incentivizing people to sneak around and use the old system instead of realizing that that was a problem. So that's a barrier that needed to be removed so that they could really make that change stick. So you'll get lots of really practical, tangible tools that you can immediately apply to your life and work, and assignments that are designed to help you develop as a leader and to develop skills that are needed to be successful. And for most of us, we're leading from the middle because we do supervise others, but we aren't at the tippy top. And so there's a specific set of skills and resources, and Mary Beth's going to talk to you about some of those.
Yeah, as Karen mentioned, you know, one of the courses that you take focuses on developing leadership competencies, but we also emphasize how to apply these competencies to your current and future workplaces as leaders. Condor has a great quote. As a leader, you can't possibly know enough or be in enough places to understand everything happening inside, and more importantly, outside your organization. Now, if you take this and you think about this in all the context of the changes that you've been having to make in the last couple of months surrounding COVID-19, the protesting, things that are going on right now, at times, did you feel like your leaders were just running around and putting out fires and just reacting and forcing changes, where you're either pushing or pulling people along? You know, this can get things done, but did you have innovative solutions where everyone felt involved and bought into those changes? For some of you, maybe, but for a lot of us, that not so much. That's not the case of what's going on. So what can great leaders do differently? If we tie into the mindsets that Karen just spoke to us about being able to grow from challenges and learn new things from others, and we have to involve others in change, there are options in how we can lead, and we teach these to let you learn about them, and also we allow you to have chances to practice. One such way is leading from the middle. And I'm not talking about being stuck in the middle between higher ups and your employees or just taking on more work. I'm talking about that great leaders are not always the ones that are out in front. When change is needed, leading from the middle is different than that traditional top-down type of leadership, in that it's a more collaborative type of approach that allows you to tap into others' potentials to create and to control the change that needs to happen. Here, leaders work alongside their followers to influence them to accomplish more than anyone could be by themselves. You're not just not just their superior telling them what to do, but you're also learning from them. However, this requires a different skill sets and competencies that we teach in the program. You not only have to have these technical skills, but you have to have be able to influence followers positively. You have to manage the political environment. You have to be able to develop these relationships amongst your team. You know, basically, you have to kind of utilize this emotional intelligence. Next slide, please. When you understand that leadership is about relationships and not just telling people what to do, you can capitalize on the skills and ideas of your people. Everyone can play a role in leading the organization to grow and thrive, and this does not threaten your position as the official leader or your status. The best manager I ever had taught me that when you let your employees shine and lead, you still get the kudos for them because you're the one guiding them, and it's an all-around win for them as well as for the organization. And you get more out of your people, and the company can actually thrive. And you have to remember, though, is that this type of leadership is not for the faint of heart, because you not only have to help develop others, you personally have to be willing to continue to learn, to adapt, and to challenge your own beliefs. And so when you're in the program, we are going to challenge some of those things and challenge you to grow and to think things in different types of ways. Next slide, please. Finally, when you lead from the middle, you're able to see this bigger picture. And with that, the growth and the change mindset, you can start asking what is possible rather than just focusing on what is wrong or blaming people or putting out fires. And once you see all these possibilities, then you can start asking about who cares about these things. And you can start finding these great solutions and opportunities for growth in your organization. So in times like COVID-19, rather than just focusing on, gosh, we just got to get back to normal, you can actually take advantage of some of these situations and you can actually thrive in these types of environments. So again, we take some of the actual tangible competencies that Karen talks about, and then we show you them. How can you use them? How can you take them out in your companies right now and use them to help you be a better leader? So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Arjun, who's going to talk a little bit more about specific toolkits and how to manage uncertainty.
And a really important part of thriving in this time of uncertain times is to have the right toolkits to be able to make sense of what's going on. And I think this quote really encapsulates the situation we're in. What got you here won't get you there. You know, the road ahead is uncharted. You don't know which direction it's going to take. Looking in the rearview mirror is good from a contextual perspective, but it's more important to really try and have the right toolkits to be able to make sense of what's likely to happen in the future. And one way to do this is really looking at stress testing assumptions. So on the next slide, when you look at the business world, every single thing an organization does is based on assumptions. Businesses have been built on assumptions. The world has changed significantly. So a lot of businesses are in turmoil right now because their underlying assumptions of their operations are very different from what the realities are right now. And looking forward, it's really important to look at how the world's going to change. What are you going to be working on and going through? And so analyzing assumptions is a very important part of thriving in the future. And it's an important toolkit that the students go through. In addition to this, there's a couple of others that we use. There's on the next slide, the choice matrix, which is really helpful in conceptualizing, you know, the various different choices that you as organizations or as individuals have, and helping to prioritize, you know, what you're going to be looking at. And so part of the key of using this is to figure out what the dimensions are going to be on the X and the Y axis. And then you plot out your different projects, opportunities into these various different boxes. And you can then get a very quick prioritization of the areas you should focus in on. You know, on the top right-hand side, you've got the most desirable opportunities, the ones that'll have the most impact, and all the way down to the things that are nice to haves and the ones that you really shouldn't be focusing on. So it's a very helpful tool for organizations to really look at the range of opportunities in front of them and to help them really sequence in, you know, what do we do on a short-term basis, long-term, and then what are the things that we thought might have been great ideas, but we're not really going to be doing. This is a toolkit that we use as a part of the GLP program, so around the world. So when students are consulting with real organizations, they go through an exercise like this to really help conceptualize different opportunities for the clients that they're working with. This is also very helpful when you're dealing in situations that you've not been in, either new industries, new clients, new customers, new projects, just to help you figure out a structured approach to thinking through this. On the next slide, there's an example of this in action. And so, you know, the two axes here are on the left-hand side, the ease of implementation, you know, everything from low to high. Then at the bottom, business impact, right? And so you can plot out your projects based on this. And then as you see on the top right-hand corner, things that are really easy to implement and that have a huge business impact, these are your quick wins. These are the things that you should focus in on as the first priority. Then you've got the next box on the bottom right, which is low ease of implementation, high impact. You know, these are things that will take more effort. These will take more resources, things that we should look at from a long-term perspective. So it helps structure in a lot of abstract thoughts and helps to focus in on what choices you should be making and thinking through it systematically. A variation on this is on the next slide, which is another tool for the growth mindset, which is around prioritizing customers and solutions. And so you've got a very simple matrix. On the left-hand side, you've got customers, existing, and then new. And on the bottom, you've got solutions, existing and new. And then you can very easily look at options that organizations have for what they're going to do. So if you focus on existing customers and existing solutions, that's the core business that you're in right now. The question then becomes is how do we get more money through the existing operations? If you focus in on the top left-hand side, going after new customers, but with the same solutions, it's really a business development type of activity. And then on the right-hand side, you know, new solutions for existing customers ends up in being innovation. And then finally, if you say, hey, you know, the world's changed so significantly that our old business model is not going to work, and we're going to have to go after new customers. So then you're truly in a transformation space where you're going after new customers, going after new solutions. And so this is a helpful tool for focusing businesses that have too many opportunities or too many choices to make, because the consequences on focusing on one box is very, very different from another one in terms of resources, in terms of structure, in terms of a lot of the inherent parts of the organization and the inherent DNA that you may have to change. And a good way to use this toolkit right now is to look at opportunities in the marketplaces, right? So if you look at certain industries, you can see, so for example, hospitality, transportation, their core businesses are in trouble right now, given the changing assumptions around the marketplace. So they need to head in one of the three directions, and which way they're gonna head, it's pretty unclear right now. But one thing I can tell you, in having used this in the past, even though two companies may be in the same industry, they may actually head off in different directions. And then the question then becomes is, which ones have been making the right assumptions in terms of where the future is? And that's where a lot of these toolkits come into play. The last one I want to show you is the business model canvas. And so this is really helpful in understanding organizations or industries that you don't have much experience in. So it's really like a business x-ray is the way I would describe this, and really getting into the guts of an organization and how they create value. A lot of startups use this as a way of building a business model around ideas that they have. So to give a little bit of a structured thought in terms of where they should be focusing on. And you can use this on an industry level as well. And the way that this works is you look at core activities that an organization does. So those are on the top left-hand corner. So key partners, activities, resources. In the middle, you've got your value proposition. What do you offer that no one else offers? How are you uniquely different from everyone else? And on the right-hand side, you've got your outward-facing functions, right? So what does customer relationships look like? What kind of channels will you go after? What kind of customer segments should you be looking at? And then the bottom part's really operational, around cost structure, revenue streams, et cetera. And so you could do this analysis in the pre-COVID world for an organization and say, look, this is how they created value. And then you could look at the post-COVID world and say, okay, what parts of how they create value don't work anymore? And you can then figure out fairly quickly what parts of operations does an organization need to change in terms of what they're doing internally, in terms of customer relationships, or just even the offerings that they have. So this is just another tool to get deeper into the guts of an organization. And so these are just samples of some of the practical toolkits we teach throughout all the different programs. If we were to take you through the rest of them, we'd probably be here for a very long time. I'll pass it on to David, and who's going to talk about red teaming.
So, you know, COVID came and everything changed. And this program at Cox, we were prepared for that. And the reason we were prepared for that is that the three pillars include leadership and analytics and then experiential learning. And what we mean by experiential learning came from lessons that we had when we spoke to 29 large iconic companies across a variety of industries, asking them what was missing. And what they kept saying over and over again is that they could recruit students from good schools, and they would have taken good courses from good faculty, and that had become table stakes. What they really wanted was students who were not afraid of leaning into situations that were uncertain, ambiguous, unstructured, and really ugly. And we spent time, and we're going to get to that very quickly, looking at and taking students to deal with challenging problems that a number of organizations across the world were facing. And we treat that and teach a methodology. And the toolkit that Arjun referred to is part of that methodology. When Cortez came to America, he wanted people to be firmly committed to making it a success. So he took the ships and he said, sail them away, we're going to burn them. He didn't actually do that, by the way, but everybody who was left on the shore thought that the ships were burned and there was no alternative but to move forward. And COVID, in a way, has burned all of our ships. Next slide, please. One of the tools that we use, in addition to the toolkit that Arjun has already mentioned, is this concept of red teaming. And red teaming is really critical. When teams start working together, very often they are reflecting hierarchical preference, and and people are trying to do what they think their boss needs. They're very often reflecting what group think exists, like assumptions, for example. And red teaming, whether you're doing it in a consulting project or in your own company right now, is a critical way of breaking down and reinventing your assumptions. By the way, red teaming came from the military. And we teach a lot of people who have come through the military. Red teaming is a way to say, when you've got your situational plan and your strategy in place, they bring people from a different division, and their job is to act like the enemy and to absolutely come up with those things that would destroy the assumptions that you're counting on for success. That's really important, right? Because it allows you to anticipate the problems that you never would have dreamt of, but now are being forced upon you by the red team. Red teaming is a critical part of what we do, and everybody in every program is going to be doing consulting projects, and those projects don't get presented until a rigorous red team process challenges whatever group thinks they come to their final presentation. They have a red team, and then they have to rebuild it all over again. Next slide, please. When you're doing that, you have to remember that first you have assembled a team. Here we assemble it for you. Very often your team is being assembled because of the urgencies of a situation, whether it's in a Cotter-like scenario where a group is assembled because they see an urgent need. But in some way a team has been formed. The most important part of red teaming is something that everybody here has already mentioned, that your emotional intelligence has to be incredibly developed. Because when you're red teaming, it is somebody else's job, like it will be your job to red team for other people, to find all of the weaknesses and then force those weaknesses, so they have to respond, identify the weaknesses, and rebuild them as strengths. It's a very focused process. And when you're doing red teaming, you're redefining the now. You're actually coming up with those things that have to happen now, not as a future punch list. It would be nice if we did this, this, and this, but this is action-oriented. What must happen, and you will do those things, and they become part of the immediate present and immediate future. Next slide, please. So those toolkits have been already developed, and they're now being placed into action. For example, we took a group of EMBA students to Brazil in 2019. We did 12 projects. Half of them were NGOs or social entrepreneurships. Other were iconic global companies operating there. And here's an amazing thing. You'll see there that there's a team that was working with Microsoft Brazil. That team was given a very specific assignment about launching a new product that had completely new set of stakeholders than Microsoft ever had in South America. That presentation was made using the methodology that we've been talking about. And when it was presented, the chief operating officer of Microsoft Brazil wrote me a note and said, this was startling, incredible, and it forced us to think completely differently about what we had envisioned these opportunities to be. 3 days ago, and then we presented to them, they presented it to Redmond. 3 days ago, I got a letter from the president of Microsoft South America saying that they were adopting the complete package of recommendations that we gave because it had forced them to think differently about all of their assumptions, and they were implementing it starting in September. We were very proud of the insights that we were able to do. Next slide, please. We also went to London. Now, I should tell you, we took the AMBAs to London for the first global immersion. We picked London because we were thinking Brexit has created over the last few years the most uncertain and ugly environment for planning a business and for implementing a business. It was also ugly and uncertain for governments, for neighborhoods, for communities. And we were asked by Microsoft there to address the needs of one of the largest NGOs in the UK and help them. And this was an NGO that dealt with the health and well-being of families as they were being stressed. When this group finished, that NGO, this was in December of 2019, adopted 3 of those recommendations. Those recommendations happened to become the recommendations that gave them the infrastructure and the revised set of assumptions that allowed them to be addressing the well-being of families in the middle of COVID, which was managed very, very poorly in the UK. And this organization was stressed completely. Yet, when they think about it now, and the chairman of the board of that organization spoke to our AMBAs recently, said that the lessons learned and the new recommendations that were instituted in December gave them the strength to prevail in January, February, March, and April. Next slide, please. We also did group work with the PEMBA program in Shanghai with a company called Li & Fung, which is the world's largest sourcing company. It was an amazing experience, but think about this. When we originally planned this, we were going to work on a consulting project with Li & Fung that related to how they were prospering and what they could do to prosper in a trade war between the West and China. By the time we got there, COVID was already spreading throughout China. When we left, we didn't know that we were leaving just in time before the disease started to be very important and to have very important adverse impact in Shanghai itself. We created a series of observations and recommendations that they then could implement and have been using to prepare for and to start to rethink their business in the post-COVID world that is still being influenced by the uncertainty and tension between the West and China, trade war and geopolitical influences. Next slide, please. In 2021, we anticipate that we'll have 315 students across the portfolio of professional MBA and full-time MBA programs that will work with 40 clients on 4 continents. We'll do more than 40 projects. There'll be over 2,000 student consulting hours that we will be working with a minimum of 50% of the projects supporting social entrepreneurs and NGOs. And by the way, those students who have worked on those projects have found that they were the most transformative personally for them. The reason that we know that this is so important is that this gets our hands dirty leaning into ugly problems. But you know, many of you are contemplating what this means for you and your career. And so this skill set is the skill set that many of our employee partners said was missing. But I have 2 quick stories to share with you. We have a student who is a pretty high executive inside a national hospitality chain. And when COVID hit, she called me and said, I'd love to talk about what to do here. And we were talking about, well, you have experience disaggregating your assumptions and reinventing them. Why don't you look at what your strengths are that can be reapplied in a new way, since obviously restaurants and hotels aren't going to be doing the business that they used to do. I spoke to her today and she said, thank God that I didn't just start looking for another job, because she led a team that included a variety of functions and hierarchies there. This is so exciting. I mean, she's telling me this today. And she said, I can tell you that the training we got to do this is not just changing my personal trajectory inside this company, but it's changing all of the assumptions we had, and the people that were let go, we're rushing them back because we have a new framework for how we want to serve our customers and our clients, and a new idea of how those of what those customers need right now. In addition, there's another person that I've heard from, and that person was complaining all the time about the projects in Brazil. And he's was the head of one division of a technology company. And he was complaining, this is a lot of work, this is just so much to do in such a short period of time. And then he came back and he started working inside this business and applying these problem-solving techniques. And a week ago, he wrote, and he had leapfrogged because of the success of solving problems, redefining their mission during COVID. He had leapfrogged, and he was now in a highly visible global company, becoming the number 3 person in this company. So why we're so excited about these complex problem solving is that it will give you the tools to improve your personal and professional trajectory. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David, and to all of our panelists. And you all have been keeping me really busy in the question and answer box, and so I really appreciate that. But I wanted to address a couple of the questions now that we've been getting in the Q&A box, but keep them coming. And as I do that, I want to come back to really what we're anchored in here at SMU Cox. So we've talked about leadership, analytics, and experiential learning as the 3 pillars across not only the working professionals MBA programs, but across the entire business school. And there have been a couple questions in the question and answer box that I've been answering, kind of the quick answers or the easy questions to answer. But I wanted to dig a little bit more into some of the questions around the differences in the programs. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'll go through it fairly quickly and really highlight what the main differences are between our programs. But before I do that, I always want to level set and make sure that everybody knows that it all results in the same degree. So we have 1 Master's of Business Administration degree. We have 6 different program paths for how you can earn your MBA. So one of the questions I get a lot of times is, what is my diploma? Your diploma is the Master's of Business Administration. But the MBA Direct program is our newest program, and this was designed and launched this year, really designed for individuals with less than 2 years of work experience. So early career individuals that are looking to gain the MBA and really grow their skills through being able to do a concentration and gain more electives with a really strong emphasis on career development. The Professional MBA is our part-time program for on-campus students. And so there have been a number of questions in the Q&A too about what the university is going to be doing this fall for on-campus programs. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't have any definitive answers to give you. SMU, the broader university, so not just the business school, but overall university, has created a task force that is working on how we reopen campus safely. And so even just this week, staff and faculty members are back on campus. But in the coming weeks, we'll be getting more information about what classes will look like in the fall. But I digress. The Professional MBA is for all of our on-campus students. It is the most flexible program in terms of being able to slow down the program, as well as being able to really customize which courses you're taking. And classes are offered weeknights and some Saturdays. Our online MBA is a different type of flexibility. So that, of course, online, all of our coursework there is online, with the exception of the immersions that David was telling you about, the London immersion. But for the online MBA, all of our classes are held virtually in live sessions each week. But of course, the flexibility piece there is that you can do them from anywhere in the world. So a lot of flexibility. One of the questions, and this is something, David, that I would love to get, well, actually all of our panelists, one of the things that I would love to get your perspective on is, one of the questions was about how do our online MBA students really engage with one another? How do they get to know one another? And I think this question also applies to MBA Direct. So I'll offer my viewpoint. All of our class sizes are very small. So the live class sessions that you have will be 15 people. So you have really great discussion, really good dialogue. You're working in group projects. And then of course, through other activities like the immersions, for example, you're getting to know people outside of your cohort. But David, as one of our professors in the online program, as well as executive director of online education, can you talk a little bit more about how you see students build those relationships with their peer group in our online programs?
So there's two parts of that. The first one you already addressed is that every class is a seminar class. So online doesn't mean not face-to-face. The whole foundation of MBA Direct and Online MBA is that you're meeting in a seminar class every week. And in addition, there's interactive asynchronous work that you do to prepare for that class. Because you're working collaboratively in virtually all of the classes, you're getting to know your people in an intimate way, in a far more profound way than if you were in a class where there were 75 people. In a classroom that's a seminar-sized class, you're getting to work with your faculty very closely. You're getting to work with your peers very closely. And those, from the time they meet Mary Beth or Karen in the very first classes, they're building relationships that are just striking in the sustained and durability of those relationships. So I have a lot of experience in online education. One of the things that it's always very shocking to people who say, well, it's not in person. What about these relationships? Is that the network in online education, because the classes are so small, becomes more sustained and more enduring after, even after a graduation might happen, than the typical in-person classes. Now, that's not to say that in-person classes don't have value, because they do, and you're with people all the time physically. But in the online program, there's a tremendous amount of sustained relationship building. Mary Beth, you might want to mention that, talk about that for a minute.
I agree with everything that you've said, David. When we started the program, I wasn't against the online program, but I was like, I wasn't sure how it was going to work, and it's far exceeded anything that I thought it could do. Really, the relationships that people have made with me as well as with their peers is phenomenal. And it's like any program, even if you're in the professional MBA program, you have to make an effort to interact with people. Now, the online program forces you to do some of that because you're put in groups and discussions and things like that in the class, but you always have to choose to interact with people. But there's ways to do that. You can also join clubs. You can also be a part of the centers. You can be a part of all of the type of discussions and things that are going on campus. So you're not only just interacting with the online people, there's chances to interact with all of the MBA groups across campus too. So it really does work.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I will add too, because again, I know there's some uncertainty, right, about how classes at SMU will be in the fall. And so obviously for all of our programs, we have been online since early March, and will continue to be online throughout our summer term. And so I think that's one of the things that we've really seen as being at a smaller institution that really prioritizes that experiential learning, those relationship building between faculty members, between your peer group, between staff members. We've seen that the transition to everything online has been pretty smooth, and that students are able to still really build those relationships and network, even if they're now virtual, whereas a couple of months ago they were on campus. So I think that is something that is very important to us, not only for our exclusively online programs, but for our other programs as well. And then just rounding out this slide before I dive a little bit more into the Q&A is our Executive MBA. So as the name suggests, our Executive MBA is designed for individuals that are more experienced, typically about 15 years of experience. And it is an every other Friday and Saturday schedule. So you're taking curriculum together all day Friday and Saturday. It's really building on itself to give you a really solid foundation across all of the major business disciplines. And that begins in August as well. So with that, what I want to do is dig a little bit more into some of the questions that we've received in the chat around the content areas that have been discussed. So Arjun, we had a great question for you that I'd love if you could address. So I'll read it here. It says, I commonly see client executive teams and frontline leaders disagree on prioritization of efforts. based on different perceptions of the fundamental business case. How do you facilitate prioritization of strategic initiatives when there could be a wide difference in opinions, re the value or the cost effort of specific opportunities?
Mhm. You know, that's actually a great question, and this is a dilemma that organizations face almost every day. You would hope that business decisions are made in a logical manner, but what I've experienced is that more often than not, they're not. So there's a lot of other components that go into making decisions in terms of prioritization. So whether it's emotional, whether it's varying different internal agendas that parts of the organization have, and the key to getting to an area of alignment is really around having common data points that everyone's looking at, right? So a lot of times in organizations, you'll have conversations where I think we should do this versus I think we should do this. And the way to get away from that is really around back to what we were talking about in terms of assumptions, right? So really having a toolkit and a framework for presenting things objectively. And so I've seen this before where I've had prior students that have gone into organizations and they've presented data to more senior people in the organization. And the senior people in the organization have said, well, you know, I've been in the industry 40 years. You've been here 2 years. So I think I know a little bit more than you do. So I'm going to disagree with your logical conclusions, right? And that's the situation, kind of what you're talking about, where you don't want to be in. And the way to change that conversation is to use a transparent framework for analysis, to really go up and say, here's the conclusions that we've come up with. Here's the data points that we've used. So going back to the analytical pieces, and here's the assumptions that we've made. And then try and getting alignment across various different stakeholders on that. And if there's differences in opinions based on that, it either means that certain parties have access to data that others don't, and you have a dialogue to make sure everyone's aligned with the conclusions that you're doing. So there's a few different toolkits. We didn't show them here that are very useful in containing situations like that.
Thank you, Arjun. I'm going to go back up to, I think this was one of the first questions that was asked. So Luke has been very patient with us here. And he has two questions that I would really love all of our panelists to help weigh in on. So the first one is, I have found the idea of embracing change and uncertainty to be exciting, but not easy to convince others of such. I definitely understand what you're saying there. How can I best go about rallying others to embrace a growth mindset? Karen, would you like to start answering that question?
Sure, and that is a great question. I think sometimes it is challenging to think about how to convince someone else to have that growth mindset. And so there's a few small tips. One is the way that we give feedback, encouraging effort and persistence rather than just the results. So if there's a failure, it's not just that you're bad, but we can kind of examine where it went wrong, and also giving people smaller opportunities that just push their skills a little bit. You know, we don't go from crawling to having to walk on a balance beam. We have small failures and small steps. So feeling a sense of success, giving challenges that are just pushing the skill level a little bit, like that quote about the smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. You don't want to throw someone who can't swim into a hurricane, but you can provide just opportunities that push skills a little bit and then really reward the effort and persistence that went into that. I think that's one of the tips I would suggest.
Thank you. The other question, and this is too where I would love to get all of your perspective on as faculty members, is what separates SMU Cox from other MBA programs in the state of Texas? So this is a question that I get asked all the time. No surprise being in admissions. So I can kick things off. Obviously we can get into really a lot of details about the differences in curriculums and program formats, and we can get really granular on this topic. But if we're going to speak more broadly across the entire business school versus other business schools in the state of Texas, you know, one thing that I think really sets SMU Cox apart is the sense of community. So SMU is a very spirited place. It's a place where people really want to be here, want to build that sense of community, want to develop those deep personal connections, whether that be with your classmates, whether that be with a mentor, or whether that be with your faculty members. And so that really helps our students in a lot of ways. I mean, one, it just helps everything that we're doing on the experiential learning side. So it helps so much when David or Arjun are working with clients in building those relationships and year after year, being able to go back to some of the same companies and work on different projects. I think it also helps make sure that our alumni are extremely engaged, not only in the classroom, but also in terms of recruiting our students and providing a lot of guidance and mentorships. So I think students have such a wonderful experience here while they're in their classes, and they benefit so much from those alumni relationships that what I see oftentimes is that once students graduate, it just comes as second nature to them as alums to really give back their time and kind of give back to what was given to them and being really active and involved in the SMU Cox community. So those are two of the things that I think really set us apart. But I would love to hear from our panelists, you know, especially too, if there's any insight you have around what you think from more of the classroom perspectives helps sets us apart. David, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you. So the notion of complex problem solving is embedded throughout courses in our curriculums. And then there are opportunities where you're quite specifically learning complex problem solving techniques using a number of the toolkits that you saw today, but learning this as a methodology. So if you think about this, you're going to have a great leadership course, you're going to have a great analytics course, you're going to have a great operations course, you're going to have a great marketing course. But at Cox, those courses are going to have embedded in virtually every course some opportunity for experiential learning that then has more capstone opportunities to dig deep and do it again. And that skill set is the skill set that our partners said was missing across the better business schools in the country. And we've worked hard to make sure that when you're in front of an employer, you have good stories to tell about having solved really ugly problems for clients in a way that you can describe and get credit for.
All right, thank you.
Well, I can jump in a couple of things too, just real quick. I could probably give you 100 things of why I think that the program's just as good, if not better, than everybody else's. And a couple of them are things that you may not think about. One is we have all these centers and institutes that are associated with Cox that other universities don't have. So we have one related to the energy industry. We have one for real estate. We have one for marketing types of things. And these are, you have access to people that are experts in these areas. And they have huge boards of people that are working in Dallas that can connect you to mentors and people that can really help you explore and tie into those. We also have the city of Dallas here. I know for some of the AMBAs, it may be not as much for you because you're coming from other places, but for some of the EMBAs and the PEMAs that are going to be more local, you think about all of the business leaders that we have access to and the companies that you can learn from. You know, it's just phenomenal. So there's things even outside of just by us being placed in Dallas that really provide some unique experiences that you just can't get from other places.
I think we could have probably a 2-hour webinar on this topic. It's obviously something we're all really passionate about. And I just took a peek at the time and I see we are nearing 1 p.m. I do want to get to all the questions though. So I will continue to share with you my insight and continue the conversation going. But before I do that, I did want to point out that yes, we will be sending out the recording to everybody that's registered, as well as all of the attendees. So you can go back and rewatch or, dig in a little bit deeper if you did need to, or if you wanted to use some of these frameworks at work. And then also for those of you that are still thinking about potentially applying to one of our MBA programs, I really urge you to go to our website, connect with the admissions team, whether that's myself or other members of our admissions team. We have many different events coming up over the next month. And so I really encourage you to continue to engage with us and learn more and ask your questions. But with that, I wanted to continue going back to the Q&A and to our panelists. I know some of you guys might have hard stops, but I'll continue on the webinar to keep going through these questions, but please feel free to stay if you would like. One of the questions that popped up is around work-life balance. And this is something on the part-time programs that we talk a lot about, because of course, work-life balance is such a key concern for a lot of our students in terms of balancing your work, your personal life, your professional life. And yes, now as the question asks, there is a whole new wave of uncertainty. And so how do you balance that? And so a couple things that come to mind in terms of tips is one is being really open with your classmates, building those relationships, and using your classmates as well as your faculty members as sounding boards, as people that you can talk to, as people that are going through a common experience, so that knowing that you're not the only one, but that you have the rest of your class really supporting you and rooting for you. And one of the things that comes to mind, and David, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about your very unique class session that you held last night, because I think for many students, it was like a drink of water, so to speak, the class session that you held, because it really gave them some tangible tools as well as a sense of relief that they had a space to talk about some of the current challenges. So David, do you mind sharing with us your class session last night and what unfolded?
Happy to do that. So I start most classes. This is a global business strategy course, and it's a robust, target-rich environment lately for the last year. So much is happening. So I started out saying this week has been incredible. I can't even count the ways that we might start talking about current events. So let me ask you what you would like to talk about. And 4 people put in the chat box all said at the same time, the riots. And I realized then that this was of profound concern. And so I just said, what would you like to talk about? And one of the women said to the group, he said that riots have served a really important part of American history, because very often, no matter how peacefully a point of view has been advocated, the country doesn't really listen until it accelerates past just talking to something more. And that was a really insightful observation. And this woman had several examples of it, and they were sound examples. And people continue to talk about it. And then there was a gentleman in the room, and I should tell you that he's Black, and he was a special operator. And he said, I had 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I never saw color on my teams. We were all one, and we would work together, and I was never afraid of dying when I was on a mission in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we knew if we did, we were completing a task that was important to the freedom of those people in America. He said, when I came back to the United States, I was quickly reminded that in America, I'm afraid of what happens every time there's an interaction between myself as a Black man and a police officer. And then he started talking about the gentleman who was killed in Minneapolis, and he said, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I worry so often about what's going to happen to her if something happens to me. And he said, he told an interesting quick story. He said, if I get stopped and pulled over by a policeman, I do what I used to tell the insurgents when we were addressing them in Afghanistan. We would say, put both hands outside of the car, put both hands outside the car. So the second that I'm engaged with a police officer, if that, in the rare incidents that happens in America, I immediately put both hands outside of the car so that they realize that I am not meaning them any harm. And he talked about it. He said, frankly, I wasn't going to come today. There's so many things that are more important than what I felt this class was going to be. But in the end, the class discussion went on in a very profound way, and everybody got to talk about it. And then I handed them an article. And the article came out yesterday from HBR, and it was about how companies in America have to be serious about confronting these issues. And I said, I put them in groups. I said, what I'd like you to come back with is the 3 lessons that you learned that were most important to you personally in what you are going to do in your life when you go to work tomorrow that is different than what you did in your life yesterday. And they came through, and it was an astounding conversation. And everybody had come up with a different path of how they could change their life to make life better and more inclusive in their business, and also to challenge their business about doing this for real. I got a note later, and it said it was the most important individual class session that she had had in her entire MBA career, and thank you for facilitating it. I wrote back, I said, I didn't really facilitate it. All I did was get out of the way and let you guys have your moment. And so it was a very profound experience for me, and a very profound experience for them. And it was a very profound experience to the military officer who was sharing his viewpoint as somebody who has led heroic missions throughout Afghanistan and Iraq, and coming back and being seen as a potential criminal by police, even though he's not at all a potential criminal.
Thank you, David. And I think, you know, what I love to hear about that is I think it's a really good example of that type of community. So that even though our students are balancing a lot, you are still able to come to class and to engage as a community, build those relationships. You know, even like our call today, I mean, you're able to get direct feedback from our faculty members about really specific work situations that you might be encountering. I know a lot of times in Karen and Mary Beth's class in particular that focus more on organizational management, students a lot of times stay very late after class and really dig into a lot of very specific issues that they might be confronting at work. And so I think you should view it as not just one more thing that's to do or one thing that's going to keep you busy, but as a source to help drive that change and grow as a person. One of the other questions that was posted a little bit ago that I want to get to a little bit is, how are the teams and projects developed for the professional MBA program? So I think this question is related specifically to the global trips. So I can kind of answer it a little bit, and then David and Arjun, if you want to talk a little bit more about the Shanghai projects. So within the professional MBA program, you have the opportunity to do global trips throughout your time, although it's not a requirement. And our trips, there's several different styles of trips. The most common of which that we think are really the most impactful are the consulting trips. So that's the one that went to Shanghai in December as an example of the consulting trips, where you're really being able to put what you're learning into practice. And so a lot of times teams are developed by the faculty members to make sure to balance each other's skill sets. So we wouldn't want people with necessarily the same background or students that are working in the same industry, for example, to all be working on the same team. But David, do you want to talk a little bit, or Arjun, do you guys want to talk a little bit about how that project was developed, kind of how that came to be?
Arjun, go ahead.
So for these global immersions, usually we find companies that sponsor projects. And in the Shanghai case, it was the world's largest supply chain company. And they had multiple projects for the companies. And as Jill mentioned, students were divided up based on experience, background, just to make sure that the teams were evenly balanced out. There's usually briefings on the toolkits and the methodology prior to going on the trips themselves. But a large part of the trip is around working on the projects for clients, right? So the teams have ownership and responsibility for dealing with the clients, working with them. So this is a real business environment. The faculty mentors are always available to help them through the whole process, but it is their responsibility. So this is really learning on the job type of an experience, but also then getting immersed into international culture as well. So the way that, for example, you would do business in China or in Shanghai is very different from how it would be in Brazil, and very different from, so for example, Europe. And that's part of the objective as well, is immersion into local business practices, so that there's an understanding of the differences of when you go outside of Texas, business does get done, but it just gets done very differently. That's also the softer skills that the students learn as well.
Thank you, Arjun. And one quick last question on feedback before we conclude. So the question is, sometimes it's hard to reach your targeted audience. This is true when it comes to large enterprise where feedback may be lost in translation. When identifying an opportunity, what strategy can one implement to present their findings to top-level management, especially as a representative that's entry mid-level position? So Mary Beth, I don't know if that's something that you would like to address, especially on the leadership front, is how to get that feedback.
So some of this, I would need a little bit more information to probably help more specific on that one. And just to start off, like in the AMBA program, we actually do practice giving feedback to people. And you can bring in actually a real life situation. We try and have some that are actually where you're managing up to like boards and to executives and things like that. And some of it comes back to a lot of what Arjun was talking about earlier too, about making sure that you have your ducks in a row and you have your data and that people understand kind of the assumptions, and that you're sticking to facts and you're not doing a lot of putting your feelings into it and personal opinions, because that's where people can start to kind of attack what you're saying, or they feel like they've been personally attacked. And so if you can kind of stick to those facts and build your case, you're going to do a lot better than if you kind of back people into a corner. But without knowing some specifics, it'd be hard for me to, because a lot of it's going to depend on the personality and the actual issues that you're having with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to add to that. I agree with Mary Beth that there's two aspects to dealing with this situation, and we would need more information to kind of get a little bit more tangible. But in general, there's the soft skill sets, the leadership skill sets, right? In terms of how do you get equipped to deal with some of these situations? And then there's like the hard ones, right? Like in terms of like the actual analysis toolkits and other ways to actually present information, right? So it's a combination of both of those that would fit into this.
All right. Well, a huge thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. And thank you so much to our really engaged audience. This has been absolutely phenomenal. And thank you for those of you who have hung on a little bit past 1 p.m. We definitely really appreciate your engagement. I look forward to working with each and every one of you. And thank you so much for your time today. Bye.